Yeah, I had to take off this hat because it was too hot in my room. But
Oh yeah. Oh, wait, sorry. I noticed that. I'm liking
yeah,
the hat, man. Yeah,
so,
sorry.
so you know this hat, it says Bitcoin 100K. So yeah, basically I bought this hat all the way back in 2021 because I thought that Bitcoin is gonna hit 100K and it never did. So I've just been bag holding this hat this whole time. But I think like it hasn't hit 100K US yet, but I think it did hit 100K Canadian. So I think that makes it okay for me to wear it. All right, welcome back to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. As always, I am your greatest host of all the podcasts in the world. My name is Andy, and why don't I kick it to you guys for an intro for those of you, for those audience members who might be new.
Hey, what's up, people? It's Dominic here. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel as well as our Clips channel and all of our personal channels too as well. And let's run it. Let's do it.
Hey guys, Tristan here. We've got a great show lined up for you this week again, as always. So I'll toss it back to Andy to take it away.
All right, sweet. So we, as Tristan said, have a loaded docket today, and we have a great show today. And we only have 3 topics today, but they're kind of long topics. So I think we'll have more than enough content. So let's not waste any more time and jump right into it. So first story of tonight is Iran attacks Israel. We're starting off with a hard hitter, no pun intended. So usually we don't talk about geopolitical news on this channel just because it tends to rile people up and it tends to, just leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Because like when you hear geopolitical news, it's never like good news; it's always bad news, right? But since this is such a crazy event and this is such a big event and has the potential to spiral into something much bigger, which hopefully it doesn't, but it does have the potential to do that. So I figured it's important that we talk about it on the show. And just as a disclaimer before we begin, none of us are geopolitical experts. We're just 3 random Canadian dudes talking about stuff that is happening on the other side of the world. All right. So, before you leave your comments saying, oh, you guys have no idea what you're talking about, you guys have no military experience. None of us has military experience either, right? I know that. So you don't have to point that out. But if I say something wrong, you can please kindly correct me or any of us down in the comments. So yeah, that's just a disclaimer before we begin. So just to give a brief summary of kind of the events leading up to this Iranian attack against Israel. So what happened was, I think this was got to be a month or a month and a half ago now, Israel struck the Iranian embassy in Syria, in Damascus. And this is because Syria and Iran are kind of on the same side, right? They're allies. And then there was supposedly some sort of meeting between members of, an anti-Israel, what is designated as a terrorist group. But, for the sake of not riling people up, I'm just going to call them a militia group called the Quds Force. And then there was a meeting between the Quds Force and the IRGC, which is the military, which is Iran's military arm. And Israel got wind of this meeting, and they thought it would be a great opportunity to hit Iran and hit the, just people who are the enemies of Israel, basically. So they airstruck the embassy, and apparently it killed multiple members, high-ranking members of both the Iranian military and the Quds Force. So they knocked out several commanders, and it, blew apart their command chain. So this was kind of and like other striking embassies and striking consulates, it usually is would be considered an act of war. But because it's Iran versus Israel, and they've always been kind of hostile to each other. People weren't sure that if Iran was actually going to do anything about it. And Iran was understandably very upset that their commanders were just airstruck in another foreign country by Israel. So they promised to retaliate. And this retaliation finally came in the form of what happened last Saturday. Which was Iran launched over 300 aerial threats towards Israel. So this included drones, this included ballistic missiles, this included cruise missiles, and apparently it didn't work that well because 99% of the aerial threats were intercepted. I think only a small handful actually made landfall, and it hit this airbase, but it didn't really do any damage. It like blew a crater in one of the runways, and that was about it. So nobody got injured, or apart from, I think there was one like 10-year-old girl or something that was injured by falling shrapnel. But like no one died from it, as far as I'm aware. So it was the biggest attack that Iran has initiated against Israel in pretty much, I don't know, like 40 or 50 years, something like that. And basically it did like no damage. But Israel is understandably also pissed that Iran did this. So now they're threatening to retaliate against Iran for this strike. So now it's kind of threatening to spiral into a tit for tat thing, right? And here's the kind of reason why we're talking about this is because this does have a potential to escalate into something a lot bigger, i.e., a nuclear exchange, right? So we don't know if Iran has nukes, but they might have something called a dirty bomb. So a dirty bomb, and I say might have, they probably do have at least a few dirty bombs. And a dirty bomb is basically like, imagine a nuke, but instead of focusing the damage on the explosion itself, it's like a small explosion, but the radiation is kind of the same or even bigger, right? So it's kind of like a nuke, but just the radiation and only a small explosion. Basically, Iran has been trying to enrich uranium and enrich all these like radioactive elements and to try and build a nuke for a long time. So they definitely do have enough radioactive material in order to make probably not just one dirty bomb, but a whole arsenal of them, right? And Israel, we know, confirmed that they do already have nukes and they have the capabilities to launch them to strike at, let's say, Iran or any other kind of targets in the Middle East or even farther than that. So basically this is something that no one wants to see or no one wants to really talk about, but we're going to talk about it anyways because it's kind of like we have to be prepared for all scenarios, right? So let me just toss a question to you guys. Like, what do you guys think about this? Do you guys fear the escalation into something bigger, or do you guys think that, given what you know about this conflict, do you think that Israel should strike back against Iran, or should they not? Right? Because like, put yourself in the shoes of Israel, and then put yourself in the shoes of Iran too, and just or put yourself in the shoes of a neutral party. Like, what do you think? Right? Like, should Israel retaliate against this attack?
Interesting questions, and that's a pretty complex scenario. If we're talking like, should Israel respond? I think that the fact that they had done that initial strike, plus they've now taken virtually no damage from the retaliatory strike, I think they've kind of showcased the fact that their military, or at least their present in their general vicinity, military power is sufficient to put a major major roadblock for any Iranian aggression in the future. So I think that just by basically taking a massive assault of like artillery, well, missiles, but massive assault of that caliber and basically nullifying all of the damage from it, the potential damage from it. Basically, they've just gone and showcased that we have sufficient military power that we can put the hurt on Iran if there was any aggression actually legitimately attempted. And so I think that they don't need to respond in the sense of like it's not like there was a humongous amount of damage and there's a lot of public pressure to retaliate. Like they launched a bunch of missiles, they basically did nothing, and the Iran, and then launching into a larger scale conflict with Iran would cause far more damage and death than what they are currently set up to do, aka which is nothing. And just, if Iran is gonna throw a bunch of missiles at them again, they can clearly they've proven that they can knock them down pretty easily. So I don't think that there's a need to respond, and I think that responding will only further escalate the conflict, and I don't think that that's really good for anyone. And so I think that they've made their point. Iran's made their point. They're like, we can launch missiles at you, and Israel made its point, and we can shoot them down. So I don't think there needs to be any additional escalation going into this.
So yeah, just to double check here, like these like missiles and launches, like there was no casualties or anything, right? It was just a matter of just launching and then it was like deflected. Is that the story, sir?
I mean, if you can count the American taxpayer dollar as the casualty, because reportedly they spent like $1.4 billion or something in terms of munitions to like shoot them down, because like these drones are very like slow, and they're basically they're called the Shahid, the 316 or whatever it's called, 136. They're the same kind of drones that Iran has been supplying to Russia in the Ukraine war. So they're basically just like these big, or I guess not big, small moped engines that are attached to a warhead. And they fly really slow and really low to the ground. So they're actually very easy to like shoot down with just like machine guns and stuff like that. But you do need like jets in the air to kind of get close to them, or you need to just shoot a missile at them. And the Iron Dome system that is like funded by and developed by Lockheed Martin is like the thing that was the busiest that night, shooting down all these drones and ballistic missiles as well. So yeah, they spent like over $1 billion just defending Israel, shooting everything down. But because it did look like it wasn't enough to overwhelm the Iron Dome, so it was like there were no casualties as far as I'm aware. No.
Okay, I see. So I think my 2 cents is, in a perfect world, I know this is like really hostile and it can seem like very dangerous, but I think fire with fire isn't really the go. Although this form of action has been happening, I'm sure it's happened before. I don't know the history very well, but I think if, much like the butterfly effect, if one thing happens, it could get progressively worse and worse, and then a lot worse can lead to really, really bad. So all I can say is fingers crossed, and then hope that they don't, get into a worse situation than it already kind of seems like. And correct me if I'm like wrong or right about this and if this relates, but I know in like North Korea too, they have a lot of like testing missiles, but South Korea is always on edge in regards to about it. But I feel like a lot of South Korean citizens at the same time don't really care, just because a lot of these situations happens and typically nothing happens to them too. So it might actually be okay, but it's hard to say. This conflict might be different from the Eastern conflict, more so like the Middle Eastern conflict. But yeah, I need to know more about this. I don't know too much about it, but hopefully no conflicts.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is that there is also like a religious aspect to it, right? Because like Israelis are Jews and Iranians are, mostly Muslim, right? Especially like the ones that are in charge after the Islamic Revolution, right? So they're kind of they have a big religious divide too. So I'm sure on both sides, a lot of the, especially the high-ranking military officials, kind of view it as like a holy struggle between Muslims and Jews. And this is like where it gets dangerous, right? When people inject religion to this, it's where these things can spiral out of control. However, there's one more thing though I wanted to maybe talk to you guys about. So this attack, the fact that 99% of the like aerial threats were shot down, people were saying that this is a little bit, suspicious, right? Like we know that Iran's probably not, the peak in terms of military technology, but the fact that they did this huge attack, the biggest attack on Israel in like 50 years, and then 99% of their aerial threats were knocked out of the sky. Is that, did they do this on purpose, right? So here's a theory, right? Is that Iran supposedly telegraphed, they phoned their embassy in Switzerland, which is the closest point of contact they have to the United States, because the United States and Iran, they're enemies too, so they don't have direct diplomatic ties. But they phoned the embassy in Switzerland and told the like ambassador, the Iranian ambassador in Switzerland, to tell everyone, to tell like all the other consulates like of Western nations and of like other Middle Eastern nations like Saudi Arabia and whatnot, that they were going to attack Israel within 72 hours. So they did this 72 hours before they attacked. So by the time that they did attack, it was pretty clear that everybody already knew that this attack was coming, right? Israel knew, the US knew, like all the other Middle Eastern countries also knew already. So the fact that they warned Israel that they were going to attack, it kind of implies that maybe they were showing restraint, right? Because they didn't actually want to like cause damage to Israel. So because they didn't want to like piss them off enough to invite a retaliatory strike like immediately, right? Because they wanted to strike Israel, but they didn't want to get into a full-on war with Israel. Like, do you think that that's like what happened? Like they did a soft attack just for symbolic purposes, for on purpose, just to kind of avoid a bigger conflict? Or do you think that they were just like completely so incompetent that like they just bungled this whole operation so badly that like they embarrassed themselves in front of the world stage? Like, what do you think happened?
I think it could be like a matter of two different things. I know we're all humans at the end of the day, and then we have like very human like characteristics. So I think simply put, it could be like a sign of, oh, this is what I'm capable of. Let me try poking the bear and seeing how far poking the bear will go. But on the other caveat, it could just be a matter of oh, I don't know what to do. Like I'm so rash. Like when we're investing into the stock market, sometimes we rely on emotion, and that could be our weakness too. We're humans. So maybe it could have been like a reckless emotion last minute thing that could have happened to us. Well, we don't really know exactly like what's the reason for all this, but yeah, I think those are my points. It could be a matter of a mixture of both or one or the other. I'm not sure. So yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was intentionally made to be a weaker assault than they necessarily could throw at the problem, because I think most likely Iran is not necessarily planning to get into that actual engagement long term with the Israelis. So I mean, they also will be aware of at least some of the operational capacity of the Israelis with knowledge of the Iron Dome, etc. All of those stuff is all relatively common knowledge, right? So that I'm sure that there any analysis and tracking and intelligence on the Israelis would have revealed to them that the attack that they were going to launch would do definitely a lot less damage than it theoretically could do, right? And so I think that they were most likely more aware of what the power that they were sending at the problem, and as a result they were potentially sending stuff that was cheaper and not like their top tier stuff. Like I think they were probably sending more of their cheaper hardware into this, because I don't think they were actually expecting to get much done with it, particularly given that they were making it communicating to some respect that they were going to be launching this attack. Like it wasn't a secret that they were going to be launching the attack. It wasn't like it was a surprise attack or something. Like they were basically be like, we are going to launch an attack, and then they launched an attack. So everyone knew it was coming, and as a result of that, I don't think that they were throwing everything they could throw at it. I don't even think they were throwing most of what they can throw at it. So I think I'm probably more in line with that mentality rather than they were just incompetent. And maybe some of that has to do with the fact that it's always better to assume people are not just incompetent, because that's a safer assumption, in the sense of like, I'd rather it be that they did this intentionally than they are so incompetent that they thought that this would do something, and that these incompetent people are also at the helm of a country with a massive military, a lot of other hardware. I'd rather think that this was an intentional act, even if maybe it wasn't. We don't actually know what goes on at their headquarters, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so I've asked you guys both, should Israel respond? And I think that you both implied that the answer is no, right? Like, Iran has stated that this attack was just retaliation for the embassy strike, but they have no intention of going further. And obviously, they warned Israel that they should not retaliate further. However, would Israel respond? Do you think would Israel would respond is the next question. Like, do you think that they're going to respond anyways, right? Because they did convene their war cabinet, Israel convened their war cabinet meeting, and then they met for like 3 days, talked over and over again. Obviously, we don't know what they talked about, it's top secret, but apparently they did decide some sort of plan to retaliate, but they didn't tell anyone outside Israel, like what the plan is. Maybe they told the United States, but obviously that would be classified information, right? So they haven't told the public exactly what they would do, just that they have decided on a plan. So, it's like, would they respond, right? And if they do, like, what scale do you think it would be?
Like, okay, so based on what you just said, like they're having like some sort of secret meetings, perhaps. We don't know anything about it. Hopefully, like in a perfect world, like the most it could be is just poking the bear back. So it could just be another sign from their side to signify our strengths equal to their strengths, kind of thing. So I'm hoping for that. I'm not sure if it'll be any worse, but of course we don't know. So I guess only time will tell, right? Hard to say.
I think Israel as a country has proven more than willing to engage in conflict with its neighbors, whether in a defensive or an aggressive nature. And so as a result of that, I would not be surprised if they do some sort of retaliation. Hopefully the retaliation is kept with constraint. But the problem is that each time one of these forces escalates, it's just leading to more potential escalation, right? And so even them retaliating at all is a bit risky, because I think at this point, right now, if they retaliate, I think Iran would be more likely to, fire back with, more advanced hardware. And Israel has basically made it through unscathed currently. So if Israel doesn't want to get, blown up, or even just get into an extended war where there's much more casualties, they probably should not retaliate at this point, even if they maybe are planning to, or keep their retaliation very, very tame, as more of a show of force than a actual assault. And in that regard, I think, I don't think either country would be better off by an actual conflict existing for either of them. And I don't think that it's going to be a scenario where either of them really is able to come out any better off from a war. I think that Israel has basically gotten as much land as it's allowed to have, in the sense of like, other countries that tend to be funding them tend to be less pro them being expansionist. If we, think about like the Suez Crisis, or for example. So it's not. I don't think that would have like. I don't think that the U.S., for instance, would 100% support a war with Iran, and I think that factor alone puts the Israelis in a position where, if they retaliate, they may be in a conflict alone, and that will become a much harder conflict for them to win.
One final note, and then we gotta move on to the next story. What impact do you think that this conflict, if any, has on the world market, the financial markets, and is it going to change your investing strategy at all, or not? Just quick, maybe 30 seconds on those questions.
So two things. I have noticed a lot of market corrections in the past few days. So I have been buying, but guess what, everyone? Guess what I'm buying? VFE. So I think that strategy over there will stay relatively consistent, but I'll hedge against like bit farms. I'll buy some of that too. And yeah, business as usual, like smart centers as well. Nothing's really changed for me.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of volatility in the market, and I think that just is because of the uncertainty of that region of the world, particularly with the fact that a lot of the world's oil supply is just in that region. So any what's the word I'm looking for? Like destabilization over there, or anything like that. Anything like that will cause the markets to have a lot of volatility, because anything that affects those global trade routes is pretty major. So I think that's part of it. So personally, I've just been buying as usual. So I mean, I do most of my buying when the market does things that cause it to go down. In the long run, my expectation is for ideally if this conflict doesn't boil into a massive world war, then it will probably be relatively localized at most, and then we will eventually see a market recovery anyway. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But if it ideally both countries back down and the markets restabilize, because the oil's no longer at risk.
I don't have too many thoughts on this story, to be honest. Like, I agree with pretty much all of what you guys just said. Yeah, I don't think that Israel should retaliate, just because, it's like, I heard a story of basically like after this attack happened, apparently, this is, unconfirmed, but apparently Joe Biden called President Netanyahu, who's the president of Israel, was basically like, hey, like you won, right? Like we shot down 99%. Like the US and the UK helped shoot down a lot of the missiles actually, and drones. So it's like, hey, together we beat this attack. Like you had no casualties. You won. You won this this battle basically. Take the win, and don't retaliate, right? And don't like mess things up for us, because if you like tank the stock market and like drive oil prices up, then Joe Biden's not going to get reelected, right? So yeah, basically I agree with the part about not retaliating and not making a spiral into a big conflict. I think it's better for everyone long term. And I think Israel should just take the win. But that's just my personal opinion, right? If you're Israeli and you're pro responding to Iran, don't get mad at me. I'm just some guy sitting in a room like halfway around the world, and I don't have a horse in this game. So yeah, basically that's my thoughts. Moving on, if you guys are ready for the next story, on to happier thoughts. The Bitcoin halving is almost upon us. So we are, as of right now, probably less than 24 hours away, or just about 24 hours away from the next halving. So for those of you who don't know what the Bitcoin halving is, in the Bitcoin protocol, it is built in that the new distribution of Bitcoin, so the new supply coming into the market for Bitcoin, i.e. the amount of Bitcoin that can be mined per block, it gets cut in half approximately every 4 years. So right now, if you mine a block of transactions on the Bitcoin network, you get rewarded with 6.25 BTC, which at like almost was it like 65k USD now each for Bitcoin. It's a lot of money, right? Like if you get 6.25 Bitcoin, well, after tomorrow, after the halving event, it's going to get cut into 3.125, right? So it's going to be half of that. So that means that miners will earn less revenue initially, but because there's less Bitcoin that's coming into the market, if the demand stays the same or goes higher and the supply gets cut in half all of a sudden, guess what happens, right? Usually the price goes up. So we've seen this every 4 years, and the halving is what's been attributed to as to the cause of the big, like, kind of parabolic, exponential growth that you see in the price of Bitcoin. So you guys scroll down after the halving countdown clock. The next picture, which I will put up right now, is the stock to flow model. Now, the stock to flow model is developed by this guy named Plan B, who is he used to be I think a commodities analyst. He analyzed like gold and other precious metals and stuff, and he found that Bitcoin actually fit his model a lot better. So anything that has like it basically measures like the new supply of a commodity coming into the market versus the how much of it is like in existence and circulating already, right? So the stock to flow model kind of is a solid line, and you see those like big steps up. Those are the halving, right? So whenever it takes like a staircase step up, those are the halving, and then the rainbow line is kind of the Bitcoin price that has already happened, right? The historic price. So as you can see, when you fit the solid line over the rainbow line tends to track the solid line like pretty decently accurately, right? And then if you look at the y-axis, by the way, it goes up in increments of like 10. So it's what's called a logarithmic scale. So I had a Twitter user like get mad at me for posting something with a logarithmic scale. It's like, oh, you're manipulating the y-axis. It's like, no, this is the logarithmic scale. Like this is something that's used in mathematics all the time. And the reason why we use a logarithmic scale as opposed to a linear scale, which is usually what the graph is for the y-axis, it goes up Usually it goes up linearly, right? But the reason why we use logarithmic scales is because if you look at the Bitcoin price in linear terms, the chart just looks crazy, right? Like it captures like all the volatility of like recent times, but like the the before when Bitcoin went from like $1 to $10, that'll look tiny, right? So logarithmic scales, it captures kind of the percentage movements a lot better. So that's why for Bitcoin, something that's gone from basically worth nothing to worth over $70,000 at one point, it's a lot better to use log scales. So again, just putting that out there so that people don't get confused. But anyways, back to the chart. If you look at the chart, the stock to flow has predicted kind of the price. I would say relatively accurately. A lot of people don't like the stock to flow for whatever reason, but I tend to actually really like it. And the interesting thing is the next step up after this halving, if we follow the log scale and we follow the stock to flow model, the stock to flow model predicted price where that next plateau is, it's around 440K. So, and that's in US dollars, by the way. So if for us Canucks up here in the Great White North, that's about I think like over 600,000 Canadian dollars. So anyway, I'm not saying that that's what's going to hit, right? But that is what the stock to flow model predicts. So yeah, here's my question to you guys. Number one, are you guys excited for the halving? That's the most important question of all. Number two, what kind of price impact do you think the halving is going to have? Do you think that the stock to flow model is going to come to fruition, or do you think it's going to be something more tame or something like kind of in between, like what the stock to flow predicts and what the like general peak, what the final peak will be? Or do you think that the stock to flow model is correct? So yeah, take it away.
Bitcoin halving, yeah. I am pretty keen for the Bitcoin halving. I've been looking forward to this for a while, particularly since my mining stocks have been kind of doing a little bit pathetic the last little bit. So my expectations are that the Bitcoin halving will have a positive impact on the price. It'll raise it up substantially. The question of how much, it's difficult to say, because at the end of the day, as much as we can look at the stock to flow graph and be like, oh yeah, it'll be at XYZ dollar amount, we also do have to remember that the money has to come from somewhere. So people have to be willing to purchase it. And there will be and should be some more adoption that comes into the market. And my expectation is that there's going to be more adoption in the market. I can see it petering off maybe lower than the stock to flow, but again, I don't think that it's going to be substantially lower. We've already hit all-time highs in Bitcoin recently before the halving, which hasn't happened in the past. So that's already a good sign for the amount of people who are interested and willing to invest in Bitcoin. So I could see it increasing a fair amount. It's just the number that I'm not 100% certain on, right? Because the stock to flow is a little bit aggressive. It's got it going all the way up to 450,000 USD as the next plateau point, and that is a substantial increase. And I mean, maybe that's possible. I can't see the future, but that would represent a quite substantial 9x on the current value of Bitcoin, which would be suggesting that we have a lot more money going into it. And again, I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's just the amount of money that needs to go into it is a lot. So that being said, I think that pretty much any move to the upside, I think that they will likely happen not at the halving event, but after a while, because the halving event I feel like tends to be more of a sell the news kind of scenario where people tend to sell the halving, and then the prices rebound later when people are rebuying the dip. And then in the past, the parabolic has tended to happen later in the year, or early next year. So that's kind of what I'm expecting it to track, is something more along the lines of that. But again, it's difficult to say what exactly it'll do. But I think that the main thing is that there's going to be more adoption and less Bitcoin for the adopters to buy, right? And I think an important thing that I had to think about with Bitcoin particularly is that with the inflation rate decreasing, the ability to gain additional Bitcoin becomes substantially more difficult, right? Because of the fact that we have less people just generating Bitcoin, therefore there's less Bitcoin in the market. And so, like, in that regard, with less Bitcoin being created, it's now harder for anyone who wants to get into Bitcoin to obtain Bitcoin, because they are more likely to have to be convincing someone else to sell their Bitcoin. And to convince someone else to sell their Bitcoin, you have to offer them enough money that they are willing to sell you your Bitcoin. And that's kind of the big problem that I foresee. Not problem, but the good appreciation factor, because of the fact that there'll be a lot less Bitcoin going into the market. There will just be it'll be a lot harder to obtain Bitcoin, and if there's more adoption, people are having a harder time adopting Bitcoin, but they want to adopt Bitcoin, then there's going to be a pretty sizable price increase. So I think that there will be a substantial increase. Just to TLDR, there will be a substantial increase. I'm not sure if it'll be as high as the stock to flow, but who knows? Hopefully. But I think that there will be a substantial increase, and I'm very excited for it.
So yeah, no, based off what Tristan sort of just said now, it seems pretty promising. So I think the halving works is you're cutting off like the supply. So ultimately there's still demand, and then less supply. I would imagine that the price of Bitcoin will be a lot higher. So like if we're currently owning a specific amount already, that amount will go a lot higher for us too. And in turn, we're going to be making more money. So it's awesome news. But I guess if we're trying to buy some Bitcoin, it might be a little worse for us, from my understanding too as well. And then in terms of the stock to flow, if I'm reading this chart correctly, it does seem like it pivots a little up downwards in relation to like the lines. But I think
If you're reading the chart correctly, you're gonna get rich. That's what's happening.
well, that's what we're hoping for. So I think it seems relatively accurate. Like although there's little like bumps and like down and ups here and there, at the end of the day, it seems pretty accurate. So maybe it will follow through, and hopefully it does, because that's what we literally all want. And yeah, who knows? I feel like there's a lot of potential in Bitcoin. So if you're not actually in it, you're like losing big. So get in while you can, before the price gets a lot higher. So yeah.
Yeah, I had to take off this hat because it was too hot in my room. But
oh yeah, wait, sorry. I noticed that. I'm looking at the hat, man. Yeah, sorry.
So this hat, it says Bitcoin 100K. So yeah, basically I bought this hat all the way back in 2021 because I thought that Bitcoin is gonna hit 100K, and it never did. So I've just been bag holding this hat this whole time. But I think like it hasn't hit 100K US yet, but I think it did hit 100K Canadian. So I think that makes it okay for me to wear it because it doesn't specify the currency. It's just a dollar sign. Yeah, anyways, to answer my own question from earlier, yeah, I'm like super excited for the halving. I think that it's going to be huge. And it's like I think CNN even mentioned it, and they said this was like the World Cup of Bitcoin, which is pretty fitting, I think, because the World Cup happens every 4 years as well, right? So, um, yeah, this is like the biggest event in Bitcoin, and it's just a simple matter of economics, right? So it's like supply and demand. So if demand stays the same, or if it's higher, and the supply all of a sudden gets cut in half, then the price has to increase, right? And this is like Bitcoin is different than any other asset where, like for gold, for instance, if the price of gold just doubled overnight for whatever reason, well, then what's going to happen to all the gold miners, right? They're going to ramp up production of gold and they're going to dig for more gold. But with Bitcoin, because this distribution schedule is pre-programmed, you can try to mine harder, but like it's still going to be a block every 10 minutes and you're still only going to get 900 Bitcoin per day right now, and after tomorrow you're going to get 450 Bitcoin per day, and that's not going to change. Like no matter how hard you mine, that's all the Bitcoin, right? You can't increase the supply past a certain extent of where it programmed the new supply is going to be. So that's just kind of a matter of just supply and demand on why I think the price is gonna kind of explode after the halving. And I think we're starting to see the miners also becoming becoming correlated with the price of Bitcoin again, as it should, right? So before, I'm sure you guys all know painfully well that for the past like 2 months, it's like if Bitcoin goes up, then miners go down. And if Bitcoin goes down, then miners go down even more, right? And I think that pattern was just completely ridiculous. And it's just the market kind of being irrational and the market being worried that, of course, immediately after the halving, it is going to be the case that it's not going to immediately shoot up, right? So it's not like the halving happens and the price immediately goes to 100, 200K, right? So uh, please don't misunderstand what I say, what I said when I said the price is going to go up after the halving. It's not that fast, right? So yes, of course, for a while, it is going to be that the miners are going to have a hit in their revenue. However, I think the fear of that got ahead of what the reality is, and then people sold off the miners just based on that fear. But I think that after the halving happens, that fear kind of subsides, and then you're going to return to this relationship where miners represent a multiple of Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin goes up by 1%, miners goes up by 2 to 3%, right? So I think that's the kind of natural relationship it's going to be. And miners also have to catch up to Bitcoin's performance just to equal Bitcoin's performance, right? So I'm super bullish on holding Bitcoin miners, and I think that that's going to be we're going to have a great time for the rest of this year, maybe even into early 2025, into the next kind of bull peak. But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys have any comments specifically as to the Bitcoin miners, and what do you guys think about that post halving?
My comments is I think the true story for your hats is you actually went into the future, time traveled, and got the Bitcoin 100K celebration hat, and you came back in time and you came to this podcast and you came up with this docket and then came up with this episode here. No, I'm just playing. I'm just messing around. That was my only comments. I'm just being silly.
Just to zoom it back to the Bitcoin miners, I feel like people seem to be missing the point with the Bitcoin miners a lot of the time in the in a lot of comments that I see where people are going, just fight Bitcoin. The miners are dead. Miners are going to zero. Bitcoin good, etc. But they seem to be missing the part where there is no Bitcoin without mining companies. So, or at least miners in general. If miners don't exist, then Bitcoin goes to zero because there's no Bitcoin. Like it just doesn't work, right? So I think that perspective is kind of nullifying the value of the Bitcoin miners. And I think a big factor with the miners is that, for me at least, that I think is a major value add for them is the fact that they can be held in registered accounts. And yes, I realize we have ETFs for Bitcoin now, that you can hold in registered accounts and avoid some tax on the gains. But the fact that the miners are both typically tend to be a leverage play on Bitcoin, plus you can hold them in a registered account, means that they represent an area where you can get a substantial amount of gains while keeping your risks, a little bit more minimized. And with that in mind, that's not to say that they aren't risky. Obviously, this is a volatile asset. Bitcoin is, as well as the miners that generate it. It's just that in my mind, Bitcoin is something that is going to be increasing substantially in value in the future, and the guys who make it are going to be riding that wave just as well. And so the fact that you can get an opportunity to buy them at a discounted rate, or at least currently, is something where we can. There's a lot of opportunity for significant growth in my mind. Not financial advice. I think this is just in my opinion. Again, very, very volatile, and there's a much higher risk. You're not going to be walking into this, not looking at your portfolio for 10 years and being like, oh, this is, exactly what I expected to happen, right? You're either going to, if you do that, you're either going to be looking at a very large portfolio or a very, very small portfolio. And, I don't know what it'll be, but I think this is definitely an area where there's a lot of potential value.
Talking about taxes and just government related stuff, we do have a next story that is all about that. So I do want to save a lot of time for that one. So if you guys are ready, and if you guys have no more to add on the Bitcoin halving story, we can perhaps move on to our final story of tonight. All right, great. So our final story tonight is Canada, or the federal government of Canada, releases their budget. And I just kind of want to, preempt this story a bit and provide some context as to the backdrop as to when exactly in terms of point in time where this budget was dropped, and like what state the country is in when this budget was dropped, so that maybe audience members who are watching from other countries, who are watching from a point of time in the future, can maybe appreciate this story a little better, right? So I begin by telling you guys about this Equifax report that just came out that says that half of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck, right? So basically, that's exactly what it sounds like, right? It's caused by a combination of high rental prices and inflation, high grocery costs, just a whole slew of your regular cost of living affordability issues. And this is affecting again, like half, or probably more than half of Canadians, where if they just miss one paycheck, then they wouldn't be able to pay all their bills, or they would be late on rent, or they'd be cutting back on groceries and stuff like that, right? So it's during this affordability crisis that the federal government of Canada, currently led by Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, introduced their budget. And you guys know me, right? I try to be as unbiased as possible. So I'm going to present to you kind of some of the highlights of this budget, and just present the news as is, in an unbiased as possible way, although that might be kind of hard. But afterwards, I will give my own opinions about it, but I don't want to poison you guys' thoughts. So let me just present the facts, okay? So first of all, kind of one of the biggest parts that's being talked about is a wealth or a capital gains tax increase. So a lot of people don't know how capital gains works in Canada. So the way that it works is that we have what's called a capital gains inclusion rate. So the capital gains inclusion rate is how much of your capital gains as a percentage is added to your taxable income. And that's the way that we tax capital gains. So we take a percentage of the capital gains that you made during a year, and we add it to your taxable income. So right now, the inclusion rate is 50%, which means that, let's say you're not taxed at 50%, by the way, right? So this is kind of the biggest part that trips people up. Is like, they're not taxing your capital gains by 50%. It's 50% of your capital gains is recorded down and added to your taxable income. So, for example, if you made 100K at your job as a salary, right? And you made another 100K trading stocks, which is capital gains. Then 50K of that capital gain will be added to your taxable income. So you would be taxed that year as if you made $150,000 at your salary, right, at your job. So that's how the capital inclusion rate works, in case that was unclear. But what the Liberals are suggesting is that they want to increase the capital gains inclusion rate from 1/2 to 2/3, so from 50% to 66.66% for individuals with more than $250,000 of capital gains in a year. So I need some maybe clarification on this. So if you're an audience member watching, maybe you can put this down below. I believe it's just for the portion that's above 250K that's going to be at the new 66% capital gains inclusion rate, and not the whole amount. But I could be wrong about this. I've heard conflicting reports on this. But anyways, regardless of what it is, basically the capital gains tax is going up is all you need to know, right? And it doesn't sound like a lot going from 50% to 66%, but if you actually crunch the numbers, it is a significant increase. And this tax change will apply June 25th, 2024 onwards. So that's the kind of first big change. And the second kind of issue that I wanted to highlight, people say it's an issue, and I think it's an issue, but apparently the federal government doesn't think it's an issue. But it's just their projected federal budgetary balance, right? So how much deficit or surplus they're running. And spoiler, they're not planning on running a surplus anytime soon. So if you look at the budgetary balance, they're projected to run a $40 billion deficit in 2024 and then end 2025. And then they're going to go from that to a $20 billion deficit in 2028 to 2029. So they're continually going to do deficit spending, right, by their own projections. And these are projections, by the way, right? So as you can see, in the height of the pandemic, we did a bunch of deficit spending, but maybe there's debate on how much of that was necessary. But right now, in the post-pandemic world, we're still deficit spending, right? And we're deficit spending and we're increasing taxes. So again, understandably, that's made some people angry, but that's what the budget says, right? And moving on, if we're spending on, if we're deficit spending, what are we spending on, right? So the next kind of one of the big portions that the federal government, the Liberals, are kind of championing are AI spending, right? So Canada's planning on spending $2 billion over 5 years to launch new AI Compute Access Fund. And then there's a bunch of other smaller line items to just boost AI in general. So the government is spending taxpayer money on boosting AI, which we can have a debate about whether or not they should be doing. So basically that's kind of like the main highlights that I fetched from the budget. And there's also other things, but just quickly wanted to get what you guys' thoughts on this is. And should we be doing this or should we not be doing this? Should we be running a deficit or should we be trying to balance the budget? or should we be trying to raise the capital gains tax or not? Right, like just take it away.
Yeah, so to jump in here about the taxing, I think that the thing with the way that they're framing it, it kind of sounds like they're trying to frame it as basically, all these the rich folk who make over 250,000 capital gains in a year, we're going to tax them more, those people who are making a lot of money. But I think one big factor that we're not really taking into account is the fact that anyone who is selling a house that is, appreciated significantly, that is something that is representing a large asset that may be generating you $250,000 a year in terms of capital gains that now you're getting taxed on at a higher rate, a substantially higher rate, in which case, there will be some people who opt not to sell some property because of that factor. Now, I mean, to be clear, that doesn't affect your principal residence because your principal residence can be sold tax-free, but it would affect any additional residences, either rentals or anything to that effect. So in that regard, you may see that more houses that are rentals are, not sold as frequently. In which case they may stay as rentals rather than returning to the housing market. So I think based on my understanding of this, it's definitely something that's going to affect mostly just the wealthier folks on the whole. Well, the big factor of the people who are selling houses that have gained substantial amounts of money would also represent an area where they are being, hit. And I mean, that also goes for like any like like if someone has a cottage or something to that effect that they bought and is appreciated, that is another example of something else that could be that would be hit with that charge, since the only thing that's covered is your principal residence with the tax freeness. So it's definitely something that's targeted at the richer folks. And I think a big factor that they aren't really taking into account is those are the folks that are most likely to be able to take their money elsewhere and avoid the tax, in which case they may just do so. In which case, maybe they would have been willing on a lower percentage and now they are no longer willing to. It's tough to say how much of an impact this will actually happen. I feel like the primary amount of tax gains that are going to be got for the government are going to be coming from house sales, though, more than anything, because I don't think there's that many individuals who are taking substantial capital gains all the time that would be over $250,000 a year, right? So that's kind of to talk about that one. And the government and its love for deficits. The government has been Canadian government has been outputting deficits for many years, several years. And they are definitely not slowing down. And I think that deficits can be a way to generate a lot of value for your population in the short run if you are investing that money into crucial infrastructure and a lot of other additions that are going to be useful for people in the future to come, right? Like if they were investing that money into a dam or something to that effect, where they invested a lot of money, but now we have a dam 10 years down the line, right? Or 20 years or 30 or 30, 40, 50 years, right? If when they invest into stuff that has a lot of value and will have value for future generations, that tends to be not as much of a problem for me. But I think a big factor with the way that they're spending is that it doesn't feel like the money is necessarily being used very efficiently. And we've also, a big factor that we should take into account is that there is a certain point at which a country's GDP and GDP growth and their debt ratio, where it stops being that the debt is benefiting your growth and is instead hindering your growth. And we are basically above that point at this stage already, which basically means that the interest on servicing our debt has now become more of a hindrance than the additional gains we're getting from the debt by having the money, access to the money now. And the fact that they're projecting on all of these additional deficits means that there's no, I don't see that rekindling back to something that is more, where we have a lower debt to GDP, because at the same time, I don't see the Canadian economy growing substantially alongside this debt, which would, make the debt being substantial less of a problem, right? If the Canadian economy was growing substantially. So if we're both stagnating and we're both increasing our debt, it's a twofold. We're going to be having we're going to be hindered by our current debt. We're going to be putting more debt on top of there, and at the same time, our GDP, our economy is not growing, and so that ratio is not going to ever get better. It's only ever going to get worse. And I don't see the government, the Canadian government, the Liberal government being very concerned about that. And then just to finish it off with the AI stuff, I don't really understand why the government needs to be super involved in AI. I don't know what the exact purpose of an AI compute access fund would be. Again, I mean, maybe this is something that I should look into more in detail to understand what exactly this money is being spent on. But from my understanding, most of the stuff in the list that they provided are kind of like, I don't know if it's necessarily the government's place to be funding all of this AI stuff. I think that tends to be more of a taxpayer money. I think would be better spent on, some infrastructure or that kind of stuff, investments, rather than, spending the money on AI stuff in a world where AI is such a buzzword and such a major thing that pretty much you put AI in anything and you'll get investment in it, right? So I don't really understand why the government is getting involved in the whole AI thing. Anyway, I'll check it back to you guys.
Yeah, let me throw it to you, Dom.
Yo, thanks, Tristan. That helped me a lot with my answer here. So I don't think I'm extremely knowledgeable specifically in this matter, but of course I'm gonna try my best. So first and foremost, in regards to capital gains tax and taxing over 250K, possibly it could be a play, but I think the biggest mistake is that people who are getting $250 in capital gains probably know quite a bit of loopholes. So how much taxpayer money would you actually get to the government? I don't know if that's necessarily the play if they're trying to get more money out of the higher income people. And I guess to what Tristan said too as well, it's kind of feel sorry for those people that just appreciated a lot of value on their properties, just because of the housing market, and then they decide to sell, and then getting taxed more is kind of rough because these middle class income people are already having a tough time, and then more taxes makes it a lot harder for everyone else. And to go down to the next part, I'm not really knowledgeable in regards to the budget, but I will say that from my understanding, I know the Canadian GDP is extremely bad in the last decade, half a decade or so. So for this method to work, I'm not entirely sure, but I hope in a perfect world our GDP can regain our former glory and not be as bad as it is now. So fingers crossed for that. And then in the AI aspect too as well, it's cool. I guess like yeah, what Tristan was saying, buzzwords are definitely a thing. Like AI is AI, Google, whatever. But some I think it would be also be good for some diversification maybe into other like areas or whatever. But I think the AI play isn't the worst idea. Just looking at my screen over here. But yeah, I'll just say that.
Okay, so here are my thoughts, right? I actually posted a long X post or Twitter post, whatever you like to call it, about this, but I'm not going to go through like every single thread or every single post just because it's kind of long, but I'm just going to kind of scroll through it and maybe summarize what my initial thoughts were, right? So, first of all, the capital gains one, where I feel like the Liberals were touting that this new capital gains tax was only going to affect the wealthiest 0.13% of Canadians. And they were kind of touting that as a win. It's like, you know, it won't affect the vast majority of you. But the cynical part of me kind of thinks that this is just like, you know, they kind of are implying that they only consider 0.13% of us to be rich, which is kind of a problem, right? Like that means that the vast majority of us are poor. That means that if they try to tax, they're implying that if they try to tax the other 99.87% of us, that like people will be too up in arms, right? So like we have a bunch of people like already concentrated at the top, and like, you know, the Liberals are like kind of, you know, only willing to target, you know, the very, very small minority that are at the like very top because the rest of us are poor. Like this is just kind of the maybe it's a cynical interpretation, but this just means that we're essentially a nation of wage slaves that has been created by, you know, just bad economic policy, in my opinion. But yeah, that's just my thoughts around this. And you know, the whole like raising capital gains tax thing, I think we really shouldn't be doing that because this is essentially just a punishment. It's just punishing success, right? So, you know, it's like the government doesn't um, like the government won't bail you out if you like gambled all your money and then you lost it, right? Of course, I guess you can write it off, but then like you're never like it's going to take you a long time to like make that money back, and like your losses like are not really covered, right? But then like when you win, the government takes part of your winnings and then they demand ever increasing bigger portions of your earnings. So we're kind of we're disincentivizing winning, and then we're kind of just, you know, not like not discouraging failing, right? So this is kind of the crux of the issue that I'm kind of concerned about. So that's the first part, and then the second part is that yeah, this deficit thing. So this is by their own projections, right? Like this whole pathway that we're gonna keep on deficit spending. It's by the Liberals' own projections, and as we can see with the pandemic, things happen, right? So like you get hit with uncertain events. Even if we don't get hit by another pandemic, there's always going to be something that comes up, right? So by their own projections, we're still going to be running a deficit by 2029. And I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared to give the Liberals another 4 to 5 years just for them to, you know, run another 4 to 5 years of deficits and trying to let them figure it out, right? And I think that it just goes to show how the Liberals are definitely not committed to balancing the books essentially ever, right? Like even if you reelect them, they're not going to balance the books. And for the average voter, I think the average voter doesn't have enough understanding of what it means to balance the books, and they just don't have the economic kind of knowledge to know really what this implies, right? So when you increase the deficit, or when you deficit spend, you're basically borrowing money and spending it now. So you're taking money that you would earn in the future and you're spending it now. So that money either has to be paid in the form of raising taxes, right? So they've raised the carbon tax, they're raising the capital gains tax, and who knows what other tax they're going to raise in the future. or they're just going to print the money and spend it, which causes inflation, right? So either way, it's going to be a bad time for everyday Canadians, right? You're either going to have your tax increased, and I don't believe them for a sec that they're only targeting the wealthy, right? Because who controls the companies that offer our goods and services, right? Like it's the companies and the wealthy, right? So if you make the cost of doing business more expensive for them, then what do you think the businesses are going to do? They're going to pass the extra expense onto the consumer, right? So the consumer is still going to suffer, even when the government's like, oh, don't worry, we're only going to tax the wealthy. With stuff like the carbon tax, it is a tax directly on the poor, right? So like the poor are the ones that are going to suffer the most, because heating costs and stuff and gasoline and stuff like that are a bigger portion of their monthly income, right? So that's what I have to say to that. And then in terms of the AI stuff, yeah, I totally agree with what Tristan said. I don't think the government should get involved with AI spending, right? Because the government, at least the this liberal government, has shown that they're totally incompetent with spending on anything tech related, or just anything in general, right? So I wouldn't trust Trudeau to be the next, Shark Tank investor, right? Considering that he picked some random guy who's nobody's ever heard of, who ran a company to build this ArriveCan app that had like 2 functions, barely even worked, and cost $20 million. And it turns out that somebody was able to recreate a copy of it that worked better in like one afternoon. And it was for like, if you paid like a programmer, I don't know, $100 an hour or something, you could probably get it done for a few $1,000 in one afternoon, and it cost $20 million. And now there's actually a whole debate in Parliament about like whether they should bring this guy out to testify, and the Liberals are kind of defending this guy, saying that, oh, he has mental health issues, he shouldn't be forced to testify. It's all a big mess, right? And they're still dragging this on right now, and this is just over a $20 million app that they try to build, right? So you're telling me that I should trust this government with spending $2 billion on investing in AI? And again, why does the government need to invest in AI on our behalf, right? I don't think the government should get involved, because the private sector already takes care of this, right? So the government, basically the government shouldn't get involved. That's, I don't know how many other ways I can say that. But yeah, and in terms of like other stuff, I think there's one more actually that I didn't include in the docket for whatever reason, but I think we should maybe talk about, because this is important. The government's plan also includes a plan to build 3.9 million new homes by 2031, which sounds great until you realize that Canada's population will grow by just as much. And oh, wait, it's actually only around 2 million net new homes, because there's some stuff in there that's like, renovating places to make the capacity bigger, but it's still like one unit, but you can technically fit more people in it and stuff like that. There's a lot of that going on, but it's going to be 1.8 million net new homes by 2031. So that's what, 7 years from now, right? So, I don't know about you, but I don't think that's going to be enough. But yeah, overall, what I have to say about this budget is it's just a disaster, right? Like, why do we have to spend all this money, right? Like, if we would not need all these, like half of these social programs that we're handing out, if we just cut taxes for people, right? I think that's the best social program. You just cut taxes, right? And you won't need like all these AI stuff. You don't need all this just help around like rental protection. Even that's a whole nother ball game that I'm not going to get into right now. But if you just cut taxes for people, I think that's just the best kind of solution going forward. And if you cut taxes for capital gains, for instance, right, you encourage more investing in the Canadian space. I think that yes, you will start to bring in more less money initially, but you'll bring in more money just from the increased economic activity that you draw in. And I think that that's what the government should be doing. They should be cutting capital gains tax instead of raising it. And just one final note before I pass it back to you guys. Did you know that before 1972, capital gains were not taxed in Canada? Right. So just for sake of argument, imagine that the Canadian government just got rid of capital gains tax, right? Like they just got rid of it tomorrow. Do you know how much, like, just imagine how much investment it would draw in from just not only Canadians ourselves, but just from Americans or just like people from other countries, right? Like if you were look at Dubai, for instance, right? Like how were they able to build kind of a financial hub, right? I know they had oil and they had, you know, an initial big investment, but you know, you need more than just like a natural resource, right? We have oil too, right? So I think a lot of the success of Dubai is due to their generous tax policy where they don't tax capital gains. And I believe for residents, they don't even tax income, right? So, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, we should go that far as to cut all the taxes, but I'm just saying, right? Like we should definitely not be raising taxes, especially in this environment. So I've said a lot. Let me pass it off to you guys. What do you guys think?
Yeah, with regards to raising or lowering taxes, I think it really comes down to what the money is going to be used for. And I think that there are a lot of scenarios where the government pooling our money to do stuff can be substantially beneficial, right? Like if the government took everyone's funding and was like, you know what, I'm going to build some high speed rail between Windsor and Quebec City. We're going to get the entire like half the Canadian population linked via high speed rail. You know, everyone will be better off. That's like an example of something where the government, you know, has an area where they can provide a lot of value because of the fact that, you know, the cost to build that for a private entity is substantial. So, and you know, there may be some scenarios where having a private entity controlling something as crucial a piece of infrastructure as that is detrimental to the people. So you know, scenarios where the government is spending the money on something like that, you know, it's a lot more understandable in my opinion. But I think that it gets a lot harder to feel comfortable with, you know, high taxes when you feel like the taxes money is not being spent on things that are providing you value. And I think that that's one of the big issues with the way the current tax policy is that they're spending a lot of money, and yet I don't think anyone is going, wow, I'm seeing the results of my tax dollar. That's my tax dollars going to work and making stuff better.
Yeah,
And I think
actually,
that's the big
sorry
problem.
to interrupt you, but there was a story that I was going to share that I totally forgot on the AI segment, right? So, you know, the reason why I don't trust the Trudeau government to invest in AI is because not even like you have to act as a VC, right? And not even the VCs, like actual VCs, venture capitalists, can invest like in good startups all the time, right? In fact, most of the time they just invest in like the stupidest stuff that like will ever that you've ever heard, right? So I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of RBC Ventures, which is like kind of the VC arm of RBC, Royal Canadian Bank, right? Or Royal Bank of Canada, sorry. And they invested in this, or RBC Ventures invested in this company or in this app called Garbage Day. So Garbage Day is an app that reminds you to take out the garbage. Like that's it, right? And you guys know our friend Hugh, who's in the group chat with us. And when he was a student at the University of Waterloo, he rented he rented like the one of the bedrooms in this person's house, and his landlord was this like 70-year-old dude, and he's like, and Hugh was basically like, hey, you know, I live with my landlord. He always lived there for like the entire duration of his time at Waterloo, right? So he lived there for like 5 years while he was studying Waterloo, and his landlord is like 70 years old and aging, right? And he's never forgotten to take out the garbage once. Uh, like in 5 years, as far as he could see, when he was like living there with the landlord, right? So the guy's like an old guy, and he's never forgotten once, right? So you don't need this app. This like app is complete. This idea is completely dumb. Like, why do you need an app to remind you to take out the garbage? Like, every iPhone has a reminder app built into it, and if you don't want to use technology, you can even just use a piece of paper, right? Or a paper calendar. But Garbage Day was funded, right? And, I'm not trying to like bag on the founders of Garbage Day. They probably had a great sales pitch and a great marketing team, and they managed to convince somebody high up at RBC Ventures to take a chance on them, which, in hindsight was probably a mistake, right? And I don't know how it turned out. Maybe they became like $1 billion company now that is under the radar that I didn't follow up with, but I highly doubt it, right? So this kind of stuff happens in the venture capitalist world all the time, and the government is gonna at best do kind of a job like that, and at worst pick even worse companies than Garbage Day to invest in. They're gonna invest in actual garbage instead of an app called Garbage Day. So this is just my opinion, right? But yeah, anyways, sorry I cut you off, Tristan. Go on.
I think I was mostly done my point anyway.
Yeah, that story was just too captivating. Eh?
Yeah, I was too focused on Garbage Day.
No, but what are your thoughts, right? Like, do you agree? Like, what do you think of
Yeah.
this story in general, or do you agree with what I said? And just your thoughts on the story then with Garbage Day.
I think your point about the government not doing the best job of being able to figure out what is a good thing to invest in, because picking what is a good thing to invest in is hard. Like, let's not just like bash on the government without pointing out without showcasing also the fact that it's not an easy task in the first place, right? So the likelihood that they fail is really high, and I don't know if I need the government to kind of gamble my money away, a little bit. like if I wanted to YOLO into AI startups, I'd YOLO into AI startups. I don't think I would call up Daddy Trudeau and ask him to YOLO into them for me.
I think like I would propose an alternative solution if the government wanted to kind of encourage AI, right? So how about instead of becoming a venture capitalist and spending money on AI projects, how about we just look at the like currently existing AI projects that are in Canada, and then we set targets for them to hit, right? Whether it be like $10 billion a year in revenue or whatever it is, right? You set a target for them to hit. And then if they hit that target, then they get a tax break, right? So not only are we not giving them cash, we're just giving them a discount on their taxes if they hit a certain goal, right? And this is assuming that they hit a certain goal. So like the more money you make, like i.e. the more benefit you provide to customers and the more economic growth that you encourage, the less taxes you pay. So you kind of reward success, right? So right now, like with the capital gains increase, as I said earlier, I feel that it's a punitive action, right? It's kind of like you're punishing people for success. So the bigger you win and the more right you are in terms of your investments and in terms of like your investing skills, then the more taxes that you have to pay, right? I think that that's kind of backwards. We shouldn't be rewarding or we shouldn't be punishing success. We should be rewarding success, right? So, any thoughts on that alternative strategy?
Um, no, you guys can hear me, right? Yeah, you can. No, I also think that's a fantastic idea. Incentivizing people to be successful is like definitely something that's more encouraging to a lot of Canadians. And if there's like benefits towards it, it'd be really good instead of just penalizing and getting people like more taxes on like success. I think that's pretty whack overall. And gosh, what were we talking about? Oh, okay. To go back to garbage day, I think it's a garbage idea. Like it's not really a good idea. Like a lot of us can just write a sticky note on like the door, take out the garbage, today's garbage day. Problem solved. Great. You could just do that instead. And before we end here, what was that first thing, the first question you were talking about again? So there's garbage day and then what you just talked about, and then something before.
Yeah, there's something about taxes that we were talking about between. I was saying like the usage of taxes or
Ah,
tax money.
yes, yes. Okay, so like in terms of taxing, like I get it. Like we're a society and like we live in the like Canada. Like you need taxes to be able to pay and like facilitate things. But if it was just better used, it'd be like more reasonable. But it's the fact that sometimes we don't know where these taxes are going to, and um, so like what's the point of paying if we don't necessarily know what they're going to? And it doesn't seem like Canada's doing a really good job. I know there's a lot of like would you call it like Norwegian or Nordic countries that I think perhaps do get taxed a lot more, but I think there's like so many benefits for them. So in the end, they're a lot happier paying those extra taxes. So I mean, if you're in like somewhat of a similar situation, it wouldn't be so bad for us if we're getting so many good things. But the problem is we're not getting as many good things as those Northern European folks on the other side of the ocean. So
Yeah, and also their governments are also a lot more transparent about what they're exactly spending the money on, right? Like if you request like a printout, like they'll list out on a piece of paper, like however much dollars of taxes that you paid that year, and exactly how many dollars went into like each program, right? So yeah, basically that's Canada for you. Like we do things a little differently here. But yeah, just to end it off, one question. Uh, are you excited? It's okay, first of all, is Canada headed in the right direction or in the wrong direction? Answer that question first. And then the second question is, are you excited for the next federal election? Whenever that might be.
our
Probably
G-
25.
our GDP is like absolutely awful, and like but the cost of living is extremely expensive right now. So I think we're heading into a plane crash in like the Bermuda Triangle. So and to answer your other question, do we need another election or are we looking forward to it? Absolutely. And I know my vote. Try to stay unbiased, but yeah, I'll say that.
Am I looking forward to the future? Canada's future, a future of copious amounts of stagnation and a country that continues to have its have all our purchasing power get destroyed all the time. Like I don't think I'm sitting here going, yes, Canada's doing great, man. We're perfect 100%. I definitely think that it is at best a complete stagnation, and at worst we are going down. We're not worse, but we're definitely not. Things are definitely not on an upwards trend, in my opinion. And am I excited for the next election? Honestly, not really, because I find it. I find the choices to be. I don't love any of the three options. I know you guys tend to be or maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I know that there's been some Pierre pro Pierre, and I know that it's pretty clear that we're not pro Justin, but I'm also like over here I'm a little bit wary of Pierre as well, and I'm definitely not pro Justin, and Jagmeet is just Justin but in orange. So I'm not looking forward to having to select between those three options. I'll say that. I change would be good though.
Yeah, to answer my own questions, I really do think that Canada's headed in the wrong direction, and I think that no matter if you're, conservative or liberal supporter, I mean, honestly, if you're still a liberal supporter right now, I think you're living in an alternate universe. But I think if you're just being honest to yourself, right? If you actually live in this country, I think it's pretty clear that if you really sat down and think about it, things are headed in the wrong direction in many aspects, right? Not in every single aspect, but in a lot of aspects, we're headed in the wrong direction. And I am excited for the next election, and I think that it should probably happen sooner than later, but we'll see, right? And in terms of who to vote for and stuff, I think I've been pretty clear on that, so I'm not gonna like beat the drum on that one. But I just think that whoever comes in, as long as they just repeal all these stupid policies that the liberal government has already passed, just that by itself will earn a lot of brownie points from me, right? And that's all I have to say on that matter. So yeah, we're running kind of late on time, so if you guys don't have anything more to add, why don't we end the show for tonight? All right, great. So let me take it to you, Dom, for the outro.
Alrighty, so I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast. Be sure to subscribe to this channel as well as our Clips channel too as well, and our personal channels. And with that being said, peace out, guys. See you later.
Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.